The rain hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the abandoned warehouse in downtown Seattle. Inside, the air was thick with tension and the smell of rust. Marcus Tank Rodriguez stood in the center of the empty space, his weathered hands hanging loosely at his sides. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too much and survived it all. The warehouse had been his sanctuary for 3 months now. After returning from his 4th tour in Afghanistan, Marcus found civilian life suffocating. The constant noise of traffic, the meaningless conversations about weather and sports, the way people complained about problems that seemed insignificant compared to watching your brothers die in the desert. This empty building, scheduled for demolition, had become his refuge. He came here every night after his security guard shift at the mall. The irony wasn't lost on him. A Marine Force reconnaissance veteran, trained in the deadliest forms of combat, reduced to checking if teenagers were shoplifting candy bars. But it paid the bills, barely, and kept him from thinking too much about the nightmares that visited him when he closed his eyes. Marcus had heard the footsteps 20 minutes ago. For sets, moving with purpose, but trying to stay quiet. He recognized the pattern immediately. Military trained, but not Marines. Too heavy on their feet, too reliant on equipment rather than instinct. Navy SEALs, he guessed. He had worked with enough of them overseas to know their style. They thought they were hunting him, but Marcus had been tracking their movements since they entered the industrial district. He knew exactly where each one was positioned. One on the fire escape outside the north window, another by the main entrance. The third had circled around to the loading dock. The fourth was somewhere in the maze of shipping containers behind the building. What Marcus didn't know was why they were here. The answer came when the main door creaked open and a voice called out. "Marcus Rodriguez, we know you're in there. Come out slowly with your hands visible." The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Jake Viper Morrison, though Marcus didn't know that yet. What he did know was that the voice carried authority and barely contained aggression. This wasn't a friendly visit. Marcus remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing the way his instructors at Quantico had taught him 15 years ago. In Force Recon, patience was more valuable than bullets. You waited for the perfect moment, then struck with overwhelming force. "Look, Tank," the voice continued, using his military nickname. "We're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk." That confirmed Marcus's suspicion that this was about Afghanistan, about what happened in the village outside Kabul, about the mission that officially never existed, and the report that was buried so deep it would never see daylight. But someone had been asking questions. Someone with enough clearance to find buried reports and enough authority to track down the only surviving member of that mission. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying across the empty warehouse like a blade. "You want to talk? Drop your weapons and come in alone. Otherwise, this conversation is over." A long pause followed. Marcus could hear urgent whispers near the door. They were debating their options, probably checking with whoever sent them. He used the time to move 15 feet to his left, keeping to the shadows between a stack of old pallets and a broken forklift. "That's not going to happen," came the reply. "We have our orders." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Orders meant this was official. Orders meant someone very high up the food chain wanted him neutralized. The question was whether they wanted him dead or just silenced. "What orders?" Marcus called out, moving again. "You know what you did in Kabul. You know what you saw. Some secrets are worth protecting." Now, Marcus understood. 3 years ago, his Force Recon team had been tasked with a simple extraction mission. Get into the village, retrieve a high-value asset, get out clean. But nothing about that mission had been simple or clean. The asset turned out to be Dr. Sarah Chun, a bioweapons researcher who had been working with extremist groups. But she hadn't been a willing participant. She had been kidnapped, forced to work under threat to her family. When Marcus's team found her, she was barely alive, tortured, and broken. But she was still lucid enough to tell them about the research she had been forced to complete. Research that could weaponize diseases in ways that would make chemical weapons look like water balloons. Research that certain people in the American intelligence community wanted to acquire, regardless of how they got it. Marcus's team leader, Captain James Walsh, had made the call. They would extract Dr. Chun and destroy everything else. Every computer, every file, every sample. The mission parameters had been clear: retrieve the asset and all related materials. But Walsh decided that some materials were too dangerous to exist, period. The decision had saved millions of lives. It had also cost Walsh's career when they returned to base. He was quietly forced into early retirement, his pension intact, but his reputation destroyed. The rest of the team was scattered to different units, their security clearances reviewed and reduced. Marcus had thought the matter was closed. Apparently, he was wrong. Chun is dead, Marcus called out. Has been for 2 years. Cancer. Whatever she told you died with her. That's not what this is about, Tank. This is about what you saw, what you might remember, what you might decide to share with the wrong people. Marcus almost laughed. He was a security guard living in a studio apartment, eating ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week. Who exactly did they think he was going to share classified information with? His supervisor at the mall? The bartender at O'Malley's where he drank alone twice a week? But he understood their concern. In an age where a single leaked document could topple governments, even a broken-down Marine represented a potential security risk, especially one who had seen American intelligence officers trying to acquire weaponized plague samples from terrorists. I've kept quiet for 3 years, Marcus said, checking his watch. 11:47 p.m. The night security patrol would come through the district at midnight. These SEALs would want to be gone by then. Why is this a problem now? Because Walsh is talking. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Captain James Walsh, the most honorable man he had ever served under, was talking. That meant either Walsh had finally cracked under the pressure of keeping secrets, or someone had found a way to force him to talk. Marcus suspected the latter. Walsh would die before betraying his country or his men, which meant someone had found another way to pressure him. Family, probably. Walsh had a daughter at Georgetown University, a son in high school, a wife who taught elementary school in Virginia. What do you want from me? Marcus asked. Insurance. A guarantee that you'll never corroborate Walsh's story, that you'll never remember the details of that mission, that you'll forget you ever heard the name Dr. Sarah Chun. Marcus understood now. They couldn't kill him outright. Too many questions, too much attention. A dead Marine would trigger investigations. But a Marine who disappeared, who left town suddenly, and was never seen again, that could be arranged quietly. And if I refuse, then we implement Plan B. Marcus didn't need to ask what Plan B entailed. He could hear it in the lieutenant commander's voice. Plan B meant he wouldn't be walking out of this warehouse. He checked his equipment from habit. No weapons except for a tactical knife in his boot. He had deliberately left his personal firearm at home, trying to break the habit of being constantly armed. A decision he was now regretting. But Marcus had learned long ago that the most dangerous weapon was the mind. These SEALs were well-trained and well-equipped, but they were operating in his environment. They thought they were dealing with a broken-down veteran who would roll over when pressured. They were about to discover their mistake. I need time to think, Marcus called out. You have 60 seconds. Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. 60 seconds was more time than he had ever needed to plan an assault. He began moving immediately, not toward the exits, but deeper into the warehouse, toward the area where the old machinery created the most shadows and the most cover. The SEALs had positioned themselves to control the obvious escape routes. But Marcus wasn't planning to escape. He was planning to demonstrate why Force Reconnaissance Marines were considered the most elite warriors in the military. The first lesson they would learn was that there was a significant difference between hunting an enemy and cornering one. The second lesson would be that Marcus Rodriguez hadn't survived 4 tours in Afghanistan by backing down from threats. As he moved through the shadows, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Purpose. Clarity. The fog of civilian life lifted from his mind, replaced by the crystal-clear focus of combat. These men had made a critical error. They had threatened him in his sanctuary, the one place where he felt safe. Worse, they had brought up Sarah Chun, reminding him of a mission where good people died because of bureaucratic games and political calculations. Marcus had tried to put the war behind him. He had tried to be a civilian, to find peace in a normal life. But peace was a luxury that apparently he wasn't going to be allowed to enjoy. The warehouse fell silent except for the rain on the roof and the distant sound of traffic. Marcus could feel the tension building as the SEALs realized he had stopped responding. They would be getting nervous now, wondering if he was planning something or just trying to decide whether to surrender. In 30 seconds, they would have their answer. Marcus reached the area he had been aiming for, a cluster of old industrial equipment that created multiple levels and blind spots. This was where he would make his stand, not because he wanted to fight, but because sometimes a man had to remind the world that he was not to be underestimated. He thought about Captain Walsh, probably sitting in some black site somewhere, being pressured to reveal classified information to protect his family. He thought about Dr. Sarah Chun, who had died in a VA hospital bed, her secrets buried with her. He thought about all the Marines who had died in Afghanistan, fighting for principles that apparently could be bought and sold by the highest bidder. The 60 seconds were almost up. Marcus drew his tactical knife and waited in the shadows, every sense heightened, every muscle coiled for action. When the SEALs came for him, they would discover that some Marines never really left the battlefield. They just waited for the war to come home. The lieutenant commander's voice echoed through the warehouse one final time. "Time's up, Tank. What's your decision?" Marcus's response was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the warehouse, it carried like thunder. "I warned you. I'm a Marine combat master." 3 seconds later, the real war would begin. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison felt his pulse quicken as silence stretched through the warehouse. 3 years of hunting terrorists in Syria and Iraq had taught him to recognize when a situation was about to go sideways. The quality of silence had changed from tense negotiation to something far more dangerous. "Viper, this guy isn't responding," whispered Petty Officer First Class Tommy Bulldog Stevens through the comm. Stevens was positioned on the fire escape, night vision goggles scanning the interior through the grimy windows. "I've lost visual contact. He was near those pallets 30 seconds ago, but he's gone now." Morrison cursed silently. They had underestimated Rodriguez. The intel file had painted him as a washed-up Marine struggling with PTSD and civilian life. What the file hadn't mentioned was that Force Recon Marines didn't just switch off their training when they left the service. Especially not someone with Rodriguez's combat record. Marcus Tank Rodriguez had earned his nickname not because of his size, though he was built like a linebacker, but because of his ability to smash through enemy positions that had stopped entire platoons. His record showed 4 tours in Afghanistan, 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Navy Cross that was classified so deep that Morrison's handler had needed special clearance just to mention it existed. "Ghost, report." Morrison whispered into his throat. Mike Sergeant Michael Ghost Patterson was their sniper, positioned in the shipping container maze behind the warehouse. He had the best view of the building's rear exit. "No movement back here, Viper. But I've got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind where I can't shake the feeling someone's been watching me for the last 5 minutes." Morrison felt ice form in his stomach. In 3 years of operations, Ghost had never been wrong about being surveilled. The man had an almost supernatural ability to detect hostile observation. "Razor, what's your status?" Morrison called to their 4th team member. Petty Officer Second Class David Razor Kim was positioned at the loading dock, covering the warehouse's eastern approach. When no response came after 10 seconds, Morrison tried again. "Razor, report." Still nothing. Morrison made a command decision. "All units, converge on my position. Something's wrong." As he spoke, a sound echoed through the warehouse that made his blood run cold. It was the unmistakable noise of a body hitting concrete, followed by the metallic clatter of equipment being dropped. The sound had come from the direction of the loading dock. "Ghost, Bulldog," Rodriguez just took down Razor. "Move to support positions and maintain visual contact with each other. Do not, repeat, do not, engage unless you have a clear shot." Morrison drew his sidearm and activated his tactical light, knowing he was giving away his position, but needing to see what he was dealing with. The beam cut through the darkness of the warehouse, revealing stacks of abandoned equipment, rusted machinery, and long shadows that could hide a dozen men. "Rodriguez," he called out, "this doesn't have to escalate. Razor better be breathing, or this situation just got a lot more complicated." A voice answered from somewhere in the darkness, calm and controlled. "Your boy is fine. Unconscious, zip-tied, and probably going to have a headache for a week, but fine. Consider it a professional courtesy." Morrison was surprised by the restraint. Most combat veterans, when cornered and threatened, would have gone for lethal force immediately. Rodriguez was playing a different game. "What do you want?" Morrison called back. "Answers, starting with who sent you and why they think I'm a threat." Morrison hesitated. His orders had been specific: secure or neutralize Rodriguez with minimal noise and no witnesses. The operation was off the books, funded through a black budget that officially didn't exist. If it went public, congressional investigations would follow. People would go to prison. But Rodriguez had just demonstrated that he was far from helpless. In less than 2 minutes, he had evaded 3 trained SEALs and neutralized the 4th without making enough noise to alert the others. Morrison was beginning to understand why Force Recon had such a fearsome reputation. "I can't give you that information," Morrison replied. "Then we're going to have a problem." The lights went out. Morrison realized immediately that Rodriguez had found the electrical panel and cut power to the entire building. Emergency lighting would kick in within seconds, but those seconds were enough for a man with Rodriguez's training to relocate and prepare his next move. When the dim emergency lighting flickered to life, Morrison found himself staring at empty space where his team had been positioned. Through his earpiece, he heard Ghost's voice, tight with tension. "Viper, I've lost comms with Bulldog. Last I saw, he was moving down from the fire escape to support your position." Morrison felt the operation falling apart around him. 3 SEALs, taken down by 1 Marine. His superiors weren't going to be pleased, assuming he lived long enough to file a report. "Rodriguez," Morrison called out, "you're making this personal. Stand down now, and we can work something out." It was already personal, came the reply from a completely different direction than before. Rodriguez was moving constantly, using the maze of equipment to stay ahead of them. "You made it personal when you mentioned Sarah Chun. When you threatened me in the only place I feel safe. When you decided that 3 years of keeping quiet wasn't enough." Morrison tried to track the voice, but the warehouse's acoustics made it impossible to pinpoint Rodriguez's location. He was beginning to appreciate why terrorist cells in Afghanistan had feared Force Recon teams above all other American units. "Ghost, can you get a visual?" "Negative, Viper. This guy's like smoke. He's here, then he's not." Morrison made another command decision. They needed to take control of the situation before Rodriguez eliminated the entire team. "Ghost, I'm going to draw him out. Be ready for a shot." "Roger that." Morrison stepped into the open area of the warehouse, making himself a target. It was a calculated risk, betting that Rodriguez's military training would make him reluctant to kill fellow service members unless absolutely necessary. "Rodriguez, let's finish this conversation face to face. Man to man." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Rodriguez stepped out of the shadows near the eastern wall, about 30 feet away. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Morrison could see why the man had earned his reputation. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, every step controlled and purposeful. What struck Morrison most was Rodriguez's eyes. They weren't the wild, desperate eyes of a cornered animal. They were calm, calculating, and completely focused. This was a man in complete control of himself and the situation. "You wanted to talk," Rodriguez said. "So talk." Morrison kept his sidearm drawn, but pointed at the floor. Rodriguez appeared unarmed, but Morrison knew better than to assume anything about a Force Recon Marine. "The people I work for believe you represent a security risk," Morrison began carefully. "The mission in Kabul involved sensitive information that could damage national security if it became public." "What mission in Kabul?" Rodriguez asked, his voice perfectly neutral. Morrison realized he was being tested. Rodriguez wanted to know how much they actually knew, how detailed their intelligence was. The mission to extract Dr. Sarachan, the bioweapons research, the decision to destroy materials instead of recovering them. Rodriguez nodded slowly. And you think I'm going to what exactly? Write a tell-all book? Go to the media? Start a YouTube channel? We think Captain Walsh is talking. If he corroborates your story, it could bring down some very important people. What story? I've never told anyone a story. Morrison felt frustrated. Rodriguez was forcing him to spell out exactly what they were afraid of, probably to gauge how much they knew and how far they were willing to go. The story about American intelligence officers attempting to acquire weaponized biological agents from terrorist organizations. The story about mission parameters being deliberately altered to facilitate that acquisition. The story about good Marines being hung out to dry when they chose to follow their conscience instead of illegal orders. Rodriguez was quiet for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Morrison's skin crawl. That's quite a story. Very detailed, very specific. The kind of story that could only come from someone who was there. Rodriguez took a step closer. The kind of story that suggests you know exactly who gave those illegal orders. Morrison realized his mistake too late. He had revealed far more than he should have, confirming details that Rodriguez might not have even remembered clearly. Worse, he had essentially confirmed that the illegal orders had come from people still in positions of power. Ghost, Morrison whispered into his throat mic, take the shot. But Ghost's voice came back tense and strained. I can't, Viper. Someone just put a knife to my throat. Morrison spun around, looking for threats, but saw nothing. How many people was Rodriguez working with? His intelligence reports had indicated the Marine was operating alone. That would be me, Rodriguez said calmly. I told you I was Force Recon. We don't work alone. We work in teams. Morrison felt panic setting in. If Rodriguez had backup, if this was some kind of trap, then the entire operation was blown. Who's with you? Old friends. Marines who remember what honor means. Marines who don't like seeing their brothers threatened by cowards who hide behind official seals and black budgets. Morrison's mind raced through the possibilities. Rodriguez's former team members? Other Force Recon veterans? How many people knew about this meeting? Here's what's going to happen, Rodriguez continued, still maintaining that unnervingly calm tone. You're going to call whoever sent you and deliver a message. Marcus Rodriguez died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. The man living in Seattle is just a security guard who minds his own business and bothers nobody. That's not going to be enough, Morrison said desperately. They need guarantees. They have their guarantee. I've kept quiet for 3 years, haven't I? I've been the perfect broken veteran, drinking too much and working dead-end jobs. I've given them no reason to worry about me. But Walsh is talking. Then maybe they should be asking themselves why a decorated Marine captain suddenly decided to break 30 years of honorable service. Maybe they should be wondering what kind of pressure would make a man like Walsh sacrifice everything to tell the truth. Morrison understood the implication. If Walsh was talking, it wasn't because he wanted to. Someone had forced him into it, probably by threatening his family, which meant the real problem wasn't Rodriguez or Walsh. The real problem was whoever had decided that veteran Marines were acceptable casualties in their political games. I can relay your message, Morrison said carefully, but I can't guarantee they'll accept it. Rodriguez smiled. And for the first time, Morrison saw something genuinely dangerous in that expression. Oh, they'll accept it. Because the alternative is that every Force Recon Marine who served in Afghanistan suddenly remembers a lot of very interesting details about a lot of very classified missions. Morrison felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Rodriguez wasn't just threatening to keep quiet about one mission. He was threatening to expose everything. Every questionable operation, every borderline illegal order, every time politics had overruled military judgment. You're talking about treason, Morrison whispered. No, Rodriguez replied. I'm talking about justice. There's a difference, though I understand why you might not recognize it. Morrison realized that his team had walked into something much bigger than a simple neutralization mission. They had stumbled into a war between competing visions of honor and duty, between those who followed orders blindly and those who believed some principles were worth dying for. And they were on the wrong side. Rodriguez checked his watch. "You have 10 minutes to get your people and leave. After that, I stop being generous." Morrison wanted to argue, wanted to salvage something from this disaster, but he could see the futility of it. Rodriguez held all the cards. He had Morrison's team, he had the high ground, and, most importantly, he had the moral authority of someone who had been pushed too far by people who should have known better. "This isn't over," Morrison said, knowing how empty the threat sounded. "Yes," Rodriguez replied quietly, "it is. The only question now is whether it ends quietly or loudly. That choice belongs to your employers." Morrison turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Rodriguez, I respect what you did in Kabul. We might be on different sides now, but what you and Walsh did was right." Rodriguez studied him for a moment, perhaps seeing something in the younger man that reminded him of his former self. "Then, maybe you should ask yourself why you're here, threatening the people who did the right thing instead of hunting down the people who gave the wrong orders." As Morrison walked toward the exit, he realized that Rodriguez was right. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped being a warrior and become an enforcer. The distinction had never seemed important before tonight. Behind him, he could hear Rodriguez coordinating with his invisible backup, arranging for the release of Morrison's team members. True to his word, they would all walk away from this confrontation, bruised, humiliated, and defeated but alive. Morrison stepped out into the rain, knowing that his career was probably over, but feeling oddly relieved. For the first time in months, he remembered why he had joined the Navy in the first place. It hadn't been to threaten veterans in warehouses. It had been to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Maybe it wasn't too late to remember that. Inside the warehouse, Marcus Rodriguez watched the SEALs disappear into the night and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The message would be delivered, and hopefully the people responsible would understand that some lines should never be crossed. But he knew this was just the beginning. The forces that had sent Morrison weren't going to give up easily. They had too much invested in keeping their secrets buried. Marcus had bought himself time, nothing more. What he did with that time would determine whether he lived to see another sunrise. The war was coming home, whether he wanted it or not. The only question now was whether he would fight it alone or find others who remembered what they had sworn to protect. Marcus Rodriguez sat in the 24-hour diner on Pine Street, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching the parking lot through the rain-streaked window. It was 4:30 a.m., and the place was nearly empty except for a trucker studying a map at the counter and a nurse finishing her shift with eggs and toast. He had chosen this location carefully, public enough to discourage violence, but isolated enough to notice anyone who didn't belong. The diner had multiple exits and good sight lines, and the staff was used to customers who minded their own business. Across from him, in the cracked vinyl booth, sat Sergeant Major Derek Hammer, Washington, Marcus's former team leader from their second tour in Afghanistan. At 51, Hammer had aged like granite, harder and more weathered, but fundamentally unbreakable. His presence filled the small space with quiet authority. "So let me get this straight," Hammer said, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. "Navy SEALs rolled up on you last night, threatened you about the Kabul mission, and you sent them home with their tails between their legs?" "More or less." Hammer shook his head with something between admiration and disbelief. "Tank, you always were crazy, but taking on 4 SEALs single-handed? That's a new level of stupid, even for you." Marcus almost smiled. It felt good to be called by his old nickname again, to sit across from someone who knew him as he really was rather than the broken civilian he pretended to be. "I had backup," Marcus said. "Who?" Marcus nodded toward the trucker at the counter. The man looked up briefly, meeting Marcus's eyes, then returned to his map. 40-something, lean build, alert posture despite the tired trucker routine. Sergeant First Class Antonio Spider Morales, explosives expert, and the best urban tracker Marcus had ever worked with. The nurse finishing her breakfast was actually Staff Sergeant Jennifer Kim, the team's medic and communication specialist. She had left the Corps 5 years ago to become a civilian nurse, but she still moved with the controlled grace of someone trained to work under fire. "You called in the old team?" Hammer asked. "Part of it. The ones still alive and still local." Hammer's expression darkened. They had lost too many good people over the years. Some in combat, others to the invisible wounds that followed them home. The suicide rate among Force Recon veterans was higher than the military liked to admit. "What about Walsh?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "That's why I called you." The SEAL said he's talking. "Something's forcing his hand." "Jim Walsh wouldn't break under torture," Hammer said flatly. "If he's talking, it's because someone found another way to pressure him." Marcus had come to the same conclusion. His family has to be. His daughter Lisa just started her senior year at Georgetown. Pre-med, full scholarship. His son Michael is a junior in high school, quarterback on the varsity team. His wife teaches 3rd grade in Falls Church. Hammer knew these details because he had made it his business to keep track of his former Marines, especially the ones who had seen too much and knew too many secrets. In a world where veterans were considered expendable, looking out for each other was both a duty and a survival strategy. "Someone grabbed them?" Marcus asked. "Not grabbed. Too obvious. But pressured, threatened, manipulated. There are 100 ways to hurt a family without laying a finger on them. Financial pressure, legal troubles, academic problems, social media harassment. Make their lives miserable enough, and a parent will do anything to make it stop." Marcus felt his anger building. It was one thing to come after him directly. He had signed up for danger when he enlisted. But going after families crossed a line that should never be crossed. Who has that kind of reach? Hammer leaned back in the booth, his eyes scanning the diner with automatic vigilance. That's the million-dollar question. Someone with access to classified files, enough authority to task a SEAL team for off-books operations, and the resources to pressure a Marine family without leaving fingerprints. Intelligence community? Has to be. But which part? CIA, NSA, DIA, or one of the black programs that officially don't exist? Marcus considered the possibilities. The mission in Kabul had involved multiple agencies, each with their own agenda and their own interpretation of what constituted acceptable losses. "What do you remember about the briefing?" Marcus asked. Hammer was quiet for a moment, accessing memories he had tried to bury. Standard extraction mission, or so he thought. Dr. Sarah Chun, bioweapons researcher, being held by Taliban-affiliated extremists in a village outside Kabul. Our job was to get her and any research materials back to friendly territory. But when we got there, it wasn't that simple. No, it wasn't. Hammer's voice carried the weight of old guilt. Chun wasn't being held by extremists. She was working with them voluntarily, try to develop biological weapons that could target specific genetic markers. The briefing had been deliberately misleading. Marcus nodded. That was the detail that had haunted him for 3 years. Dr. Chin hadn't been a kidnapped scientist forced to work against her will. She had been a willing collaborator, developing weapons of mass destruction for terrorist organizations. But Walsh made the call to extract her anyway, because by the time we figured out the truth, we were already committed. And because leaving her there would have meant those weapons eventually being used against American troops or civilians. Marcus remembered that night with crystal clarity. The village was supposed to be lightly defended, but they had walked into a complex ambush. By the time they fought their way to Chin's location, 2 Marines were dead and 3 others were wounded. They found Dr. Chun in a laboratory that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Biological samples in refrigerated containers, computer models showing genetic targeting algorithms, research notes detailing how to weaponize plague, cholera, and half a dozen other diseases. Chin tried to bargain, Marcus said. Offered to work for us instead of them. Said she had information about biological weapons programs in China, North Korea, Iran. All we had to do was let her finish her current project. Marcus remembered Walsh's response. The captain had looked at the research, looked at Chun, and then methodically began destroying everything in a laboratory. Computers, samples, research notes, everything. She screamed at us, Marcus said we were making a mistake, that the people who sent us wanted her research intact. That's when we realized we had been set up. Someone in American intelligence wanted those biological weapons. They had fed us false information to get us to extract Chun and her research so they could acquire it for themselves. Marcus felt the old anger returning. Good Marines had died so that some bureaucrat could add biological weapons to America's arsenal. The mission parameters had been deliberately designed to put them in maximum danger while giving them minimum information. Walsh chose to destroy everything rather than bring it back. Cost him his career. He knew it would, but he did it anyway. Because some things are more important than following orders. Marcus understood why Walsh was being pressured now. 3 years had passed, and someone had decided they wanted those biological weapons after all. Maybe the international situation had changed, or maybe new threats had emerged. Whatever the reason, people were asking questions about why the mission had failed to recover the research materials. If Walsh breaks, how much does he know? Hammer considered this carefully. Too much. He knows who gave the original briefing, who altered the mission parameters, who was supposed to receive Chun and her research. He could bring down half the intelligence community if he decided to go public. Marcus felt trapped. If Walsh talked, the people responsible for the Kabul mission would be exposed. But if he didn't talk, his family would continue to suffer. Either way, the surviving members of the Force Recon team would be considered loose ends that needed to be eliminated. What are our options? Hammer smiled grimly. We could disappear. New identities, move to somewhere remote, hope they forget about us eventually. Or we could do what we were trained to do. Hunt down the people responsible and neutralize the threat. Marcus knew Hammer was right, but the implications were staggering. They would essentially be declaring war on elements of their own government, using their military training against the people who had trained them. That's treason, Marcus said quietly. Is it loyalty to the oath we swore to protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic? Marcus had wrestled with this question for 3 years. At what point does following orders become betraying your principles? When does loyalty to superiors conflict with loyalty to country? Spider approached their table, sliding into the booth next to Hammer. Up close, he looked tired but alert, his eyes scanning the diner for threats. We've got movement, he said quietly. 3 vehicles circling the block for the last 20 minutes. Professional surveillance, but not trying too hard to hide it. Doc joined them a moment later, her nurse's uniform replaced by jeans and a jacket. I counted at least 8 personnel. Different agencies judging by their equipment and tactics. Someone's taking this seriously. Marcus felt the net closing around them. The SEALs he had confronted last night had apparently reported his conversation with Morrison, and now multiple agencies were involved. How long before they move? Marcus asked. Spider shrugged. Depends on their orders. If they want us alive for questioning, they'll wait for a better opportunity. If they want us eliminated, they could blow this place right now and call it gas leak. Marcus weighed their options. They could try to slip out the back, but professional surveillance teams would have anticipated that. They could surrender and hope for fair treatment, but that seemed unlikely given the stakes involved. Or they could remind these people why Force Recon Marines were considered the deadliest warriors in the military. Hammer, how many of our old team can you contact in the next 6 hours? Maybe a dozen. More if we're not picky about how desperate they are. Marcus made his decision. If they were going to be hunted, they might as well give their hunters something to think about. Make the calls. Tell them it's time to settle old debts. Hammer nodded slowly, understanding the implications. They were about to go to war against their own government, using skills their own government had taught them. What's the objective? Doc asked. Marcus thought about Captain Walsh, sitting in some black site somewhere, being forced to choose between his honor and his family's safety. He thought about Dr. Chin's biological weapons, probably being developed in some secret laboratory even now. He thought about all the good Marines who had died following orders that were lies from the beginning. The objective is simple, Marcus said. We're going to remind everyone involved that some prices are too high to pay, and some secrets are too dangerous to keep. Spider grinned, the expression transforming his tired face into something predatory. Rules of engagement. Marcus checked his watch. 5:15 a.m. In 3 hours, the morning rush would begin, filling the streets with innocent civilians. Whatever they did, it had to be finished before then. Same rules as always, Marcus said. Protect the innocent, serve the mission, take care of your brothers. Everything else is secondary. Doc pulled out her phone, her fingers moving quickly over the keys. I'm sending a message to Walsh's family, warning them to get somewhere safe. Can you reach them without alerting surveillance? Hammer asked. I have ways. Walsh taught his wife some basic communication protocols when he was deployed. She'll understand the message. Marcus felt a moment of hope. Maybe they could protect Walsh's family while simultaneously dealing with the people threatening them. It would require perfect timing and flawless execution, but they had done impossible things before. Spider, what kind of equipment do we have access to? Depends how creative we want to get. I've got contacts in the construction industry, private security, even some military contractors who owe me favors. We can't match government resources, but we can make things very uncomfortable for anyone hunting us. Marcus stood up, leaving money on the table for the coffee. Then, let's get to work. We have a war to win. As they prepared to leave the diner, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The certainty that came from having a clear mission and reliable teammates. The government that had trained them to be weapons was about to discover that weapons, once created, could be difficult to control. The people responsible for the Kabul mission were about to learn why Force Recon Marines never left their brothers behind and never forgot a betrayal. The hunt was about to become a war, and Marcus Rodriguez was no longer the hunted. He was the hunter, backed by the deadliest warriors the American military had ever produced. The enemy had made one critical mistake. They had given him something to fight for the abandoned auto repair shop in Georgetown, sat between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore, unremarkable in the way that made it perfect for clandestine operations. Marcus Rodriguez crouched on the roof of the building across the street, watching through high-powered binoculars as Deputy Director Catherine Voss of the Central Intelligence Agency stepped out of an armored SUV. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the warehouse. 3 days of carefully planned surveillance, strategic intelligence gathering, and methodical elimination of security layers. Marcus and his team had worked with surgical precision, identifying the key players in the conspiracy while avoiding the dozens of federal agents hunting them. Voss was the prize they had been seeking. According to the intelligence Doc had gathered through her network of military contractors and government employees, Voss had been the architect of the Kabul mission. She had personally altered the mission parameters, feeding Walsh's team false information to ensure they would extract Dr. Chun and her biological weapons research. What made Voss particularly dangerous was her position within the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. She had access to cutting-edge research programs, unlimited black budgets, and the authority to task military units for operations that officially didn't exist. Target confirmed. Marcus whispered into his throat mic. Voss just entered the building. 3 bodyguards, standard protocol. Spider's voice came back through the earpiece. I'm in position on the east side. 2 more vehicles just pulled up. Looks like she's got backup. Doc's voice joined the conversation from her position in the bookstore. I count at least 12 personnel total. Some are trying to look like civilians, but their positioning gives them away. Hammer, coordinating from their command post 2 blocks away, kept his voice calm and professional. This is bigger than we anticipated. Voss isn't just meeting with subordinates. This looks like a full operational briefing. Marcus adjusted his binoculars, studying the new arrivals. He recognized several faces from the intelligence files they had compiled over the last 72 hours. Defense Intelligence Agency officers, NSA analysts, and at least 2 people who worked for black programs so classified that their agencies didn't have names. Change of plans, Marcus said. This isn't just about stopping Voss anymore. We've stumbled onto something bigger. Through the window of the repair shop, Marcus could see figures moving in the back room. Someone had set up a large display screen, and people were gathering around what looked like a detailed presentation. He couldn't make out the specifics, but the body language suggested this was a high-level planning session for a major operation. Marcus made a command decision that would have made his military instructors proud and his therapist horrified. Instead of executing their planned snatch and grab operation against Voss, they were going to infiltrate the meeting and gather intelligence on what these people were planning. Doc, can you get inside without being detected? Already working on it. The bookstore owner is an Army veteran who doesn't like government spooks. He's letting me use his basement access to the storm drain system. Spider, I need a distraction in 15 minutes. Something that draws their external security away from the building. Roger that. How big a distraction? Marcus considered their options. They needed to create enough chaos to occupy the security teams without harming innocent civilians or triggering a full federal response. Medium-sized, car fire, maybe a gas leak scare, something that requires their attention but doesn't bring the fire department. As Marcus prepared to move from his observation post, his phone vibrated with an encrypted message from a number he didn't recognize. The text was simple: Walsh Family Secure. You have 24 hours. A friend. Marcus felt a moment of relief mixed with apprehension. Someone was helping them. Someone with enough resources to protect Walsh's family and enough access to know about their current operation. The question was whether this mysterious ally was genuine or part of an elaborate trap. He pushed the doubt aside. In his experience, paranoia was useful for staying alive, but it could also paralyze you when action was needed. Right now, they needed to act. Marcus climbed down from the roof and made his way through the alley system toward the repair shop. 3 years of urban survival had taught him how to move through cities like a ghost, using maintenance passages, construction routes, and forgotten spaces that most people never noticed. As he approached the target building, Spider's distraction began with perfect timing. A construction dumpster 2 blocks away suddenly erupted in flames, sending black smoke into the morning sky. Within minutes, sirens were wailing, and uniformed security personnel were leaving their posts to investigate. Doc's voice came through the earpiece with professional calm. I'm inside, moving toward the meeting room. Audio pickup is online. Marcus slipped through a basement window that Doc had left unlocked for him, finding himself in a maze of old equipment and forgotten storage. The building had been a legitimate auto repair shop until 6 months ago, when a series of unfortunate accidents had forced the owner to sell to a shell corporation with ties to the CIA. Moving through the basement, Marcus could hear voices from above. The old building's thin floors made it possible to follow conversations, and what he heard made his blood run cold. Phase 1 is complete, a voice that Marcus recognized as Deputy Director Voss was saying. We have successfully pressured Captain Walsh into providing details about the Kabul mission. Phase 2 involves neutralizing the remaining witnesses and recovering the research materials. Another voice, male and authoritative, responded. What about the Force Recon team? Our intelligence suggests they've regrouped and are actively working to expose the operation. Rodriguez and his people are being handled. We've identified their associates, tracked their communications, and have teams in position to eliminate them within the next 6 hours. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. They weren't just hunting him and his team. They were planning to eliminate everyone who might have knowledge of the biological weapons program. A third voice joined the conversation, and Marcus recognized it as belonging to someone very high up the chain of command. The president has authorized Operation Clean Slate. Any individual with knowledge of the Chun research is to be considered a national security threat and dealt with accordingly. Marcus understood now why they had been so aggressive in hunting his team. This wasn't just about covering up one failed mission. They were implementing a systematic elimination of everyone who knew about the biological weapons program. Doc's voice whispered in his earpiece. I'm recording everything. This is enough to bring down the entire operation. But even as she spoke, Marcus heard the sound of heavy footsteps moving through the building. Someone had detected their infiltration, and security teams were converging on their position. Doc, get out now. Spider, we need immediate extraction. Working on it, Spider replied. But we've got problems. Federal agents are setting up a perimeter around the entire block. Marcus realized they had walked into a trap. The meeting wasn't just about planning future operations. It was bait, designed to draw his team out of hiding so they could be eliminated. He heard Doc moving above him, her footsteps quick but controlled as she tried to reach her escape route. Then he heard other sounds, doors slamming, shouts of federal agents, and the distinctive mechanical noise of automatic weapons being readied for use. Tank, they're storming the building. Doc's voice was tight with tension. Multiple entry points, full tactical gear. Marcus made the hardest decision of his military career. Instead of trying to escape, he moved toward the sounds of the federal assault, planning to create enough chaos to cover Doc's retreat. He found what he was looking for in the repair shop's old equipment storage. Acetylene tanks used for welding, still connected to their hoses and gauges. With the skills Spider had taught him years ago in Afghanistan, Marcus rigged an improvised explosive device that would create a spectacular but non-lethal distraction. Everyone out of the building now. Marcus said into his throat mic, 30 seconds until fireworks. He could hear Doc's breathing as she moved through the basement toward her escape route. Above them, the federal agents were working methodically through the building, checking every room and closet. Marcus triggered his improvised device and ran for the window he had entered through. Behind him, the acetylene explosion blew out most of the building's windows and filled the interior with flame and smoke. No one would be killed, but the entire federal operation would be thrown into chaos. As he climbed out of the basement, Marcus heard Doc's voice on the radio, clear and moving. I've got the recordings. But Marcus's relief was short-lived. As he emerged from the alley behind the repair shop, he found himself face to face with Lieutenant Commander Morrison, the SEAL team leader from the warehouse confrontation 3 nights earlier. Morrison was alone, his sidearm drawn, but pointed at the ground. His expression was grim, but not hostile. Rodriguez, we need to talk. Marcus tensed, ready to fight or run, but something in Morrison's voice stopped him. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus recognized, the hollow look of someone whose faith in the system had been shattered. Talk fast, Marcus said. I've got federal agents behind me and a city full of people hunting my team. I know. I'm the one who warned them you were here. Marcus felt betrayal surge through him, followed immediately by the cold calculation of combat. Morrison had betrayed them, but he had also approached alone and wasn't behaving like someone planning an arrest. But I'm also the one who sent the message about Walsh's family, Morrison continued. And I'm the one who's going to help you get out of here alive. Marcus studied the younger man's face, looking for signs of deception. What he saw instead was the kind of moral exhaustion that came from discovering that everything you believed in was built on lies. Why? Morrison holstered his sidearm, a gesture that could have been seen as surrender or trust. Because 3 days ago, you asked me a question I couldn't answer. You asked why I was hunting the people who did the right thing instead of hunting the people who gave the wrong orders. Behind them, the sound of sirens was getting closer, and Marcus could see smoke billowing from the repair shop. Federal agents would be flooding the area within minutes. I did some digging, Morrison continued. Found out what really happened in Kabul, what Shin was really working on, and who really wanted that research. You and Walsh were set up from the beginning. Marcus made a snap decision based on instinct and experience. Morrison was offering him something more valuable than escape, an ally inside the system that was hunting them. What do you want from me? Help me take down the people responsible. I've had access to classified files, operational intelligence, and inside knowledge of how these black programs work. You've got the skills and the team to actually do something with that information. Marcus could hear vehicles approaching from multiple directions. Whatever decision he made, it had to be now. My team doesn't trust easily, especially not federal agents. Then, don't ask them to trust me. Ask them to use me. I'm expendable, but the information I can provide might be the key to exposing this entire conspiracy. Marcus made his choice. Doc, Spider, Hammer, new plan. We got a potential asset who claims he wants to help. Rendezvous at Point Delta in 2 hours. As they moved away from the chaos behind them, Marcus felt the familiar weight of command decisions. He was either recruiting a valuable ally or walking his team into a sophisticated trap. But in war, every choice involved risk. And this had definitely become a war. Morrison fell in a step beside him, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone trained in urban combat. There's something else you need to know, he said quietly. Operation Clean Slate isn't just about eliminating witnesses. They're planning to restart Chen's research program. Everything Walsh destroyed in Kabul, they're going to rebuild. Marcus felt his jaw clench. The biological weapons program wasn't dead. It had just been postponed until they could clean up the loose ends and eliminate the people who might object to its resurrection. How long do we have? According to the briefing I attended yesterday, the new laboratory is already under construction. They're planning to have operational biological weapons within 6 months. Marcus realized that their personal fight for survival had become something much larger. They weren't just trying to stay alive anymore. They were trying to prevent their own government from developing weapons that could kill millions of people. The stakes had just gotten much higher, and the timeline had just gotten much shorter. But Marcus Rodriguez had spent his entire adult life preparing for impossible missions against overwhelming odds. The only difference now was that instead of fighting for his country, he was fighting against the people who claimed to represent it. The distinction was important, but it didn't change his determination to win #the final stand. The underground bunker beneath the abandoned missile facility in Eastern Virginia had been forgotten by most government agencies, but Hammer Washington never forgot anything that might be useful in a fight. Built during the Cold War and decommissioned in the 1990s, it still had power, communication capabilities, and most importantly, electromagnetic shielding that made electronic surveillance impossible. Marcus Rodriguez stood in front of a wall covered with photographs, documents, and connecting strings that looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But every connection had been verified, every photograph authenticated, and every document cross-referenced through multiple sources. Operation Clean Slate, Marcus said, addressing the 12 people gathered in the bunker's main briefing room. The systematic elimination of everyone with knowledge of the biological weapons program that originated with Dr. Sarah Chen's research in Afghanistan. The faces looking back at him represented the core of what remained of the force recon community that had served in Afghanistan. Some were active duty, others veterans, all of them people who had proven their loyalty and capability under fire. Lieutenant Commander Morrison sat in the back, still viewed with suspicion by some, but gradually earning acceptance through the quality of intelligence he provided. Phase 1 was pressuring Captain Walsh into providing details about the Kabul mission. Marcus continued. Phase 2 was eliminating the witnesses, starting with our team. Phase 3 is the construction of a new biological weapons facility and the resurrection of Chen's research program. Doc Kim stepped forward, holding a tablet computer loaded with the recordings they had obtained from the Georgetown meeting. Based on Morrison's intelligence and our own surveillance, the new facility is located here. She gestured to a satellite photograph showing what appeared to be a pharmaceutical research complex in rural Maryland. Biolabs Incorporated, Doc continued. Officially, they're developing vaccines for emerging infectious diseases. Unofficially, they're using Chen's research to create biological agents that can target specific genetic markers. Hammer studied the satellite image with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades planning military operations. Security? Morrison answered. Private military contractors, most with special operations backgrounds. Electronic surveillance, armed patrols, restricted airspace. It's basically a fortress disguised as a research facility. Spider Morales pointed to the map. What about civilian population? We can't risk collateral damage. The facility is isolated, surrounded by farmland and forest. Nearest residential area is 8 miles away. If we hit it during the night shift, civilian casualties should be minimal. Marcus felt the weight of command as he looked at the faces around him. These people were following him into what was essentially a private war against their own government. Some would probably die. Others would spend the rest of their lives as fugitives. All of them were sacrificing everything based on his belief that some principles were worth any price. Before we go any further, Marcus said, I want to be clear about what we're proposing. We're planning to assault a government facility, destroy classified research, and probably kill American citizens in the process. Legally, that makes us terrorists. Morally, he paused, thinking about the biological weapons that could kill millions of people. Morally, I believe we're preventing genocide. Staff Sergeant Carlos Bear Gutierrez raised his hand. He was the team's heavy weapons specialist, a giant of a man with gentle eyes and an engineer's mind. What's our exit strategy? Assuming we succeed, how do we avoid spending the rest of our lives in federal prison? Morrison leaned forward. That's where I come in. I've been working with sympathetic elements inside multiple agencies. People who are as disturbed by this program as we are. If we can document what Biolabs is really doing and get that evidence to the right people, there might be enough political pressure to force an investigation. Might be, Spider asked skeptically. Nothing's guaranteed, Morrison admitted. But the alternative is allowing the program to continue. In 6 months, the American government will have biological weapons that can target specific ethnicities, specific genetic profiles, even specific families. Think about what that means. Marcus didn't need to think about it. He had seen enough war to understand that weapons, once created, were eventually used. Someone would decide that a particular ethnic group was a threat, or a particular population was expendable, and millions of people would die from diseases they couldn't fight. What about Walsh? Asked Sergeant First Class Maria Phoenix Santos, the team's intelligence specialist. Last we heard, he was still being held. Morrison checked his secure phone. According to my sources, Walsh is being kept at a black site facility in West Virginia. Heavily guarded, but not impossible to reach. Marcus made a command decision. We split into 2 teams. Phoenix, Bear, and Doc will hit the West Virginia facility and extract Walsh. The rest of us assault Biolabs and destroy the research program. That's suicide, Hammer said bluntly. Biolabs has too much security for a frontal assault. Then, we don't make it frontal, Marcus replied. We make it surgical. Spider, what kind of explosives do we have access to? Spider grinned, the expression transforming his tired face into something predatory. Enough to turn that research facility into a smoking crater. But if we want to preserve evidence, we'll need to be more selective. Marcus studied the satellite photos, his mind automatically calculating fields of fire, approach routes, and extraction possibilities. It was like planning any other military operation, except the stakes were higher and the enemy was better funded. Morrison, can you get us blueprints of the facility? Already working on it. I should have detailed schematics within 6 hours. What about the research itself? Doc asked. If we destroy the physical facility, what's to stop them from rebuilding somewhere else? Morrison answered grimly. The research data is stored on servers with multiple redundant backups. We need to simultaneously destroy the primary facility, the backup servers, and eliminate the key personnel who could recreate the work from memory. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They weren't just planning to destroy a building. They were planning to assassinate American scientists and government officials. Marcus felt the moral weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. In Afghanistan, the enemy had been clear and the mission parameters straightforward. This was murkier, more complex, with consequences that could ripple through American society for generations. There's another option, Doc said quietly. Instead of destroying everything, we could steal it. Take the research, the data, the evidence of what they're planning, and make it public. Whistleblowing. Phoenix asked. More than that. Full exposure. Every document, every email, every classified briefing about this program. Force a public debate about whether the American government should be developing ethnic-specific biological weapons. Marcus considered this. Public exposure would certainly end the program, but it would also reveal classified information that could damage national security in other ways. The political fallout would be enormous, probably bringing down the current administration and severely damaging American credibility internationally. But the alternative was allowing the program to continue in secret with no oversight and no accountability. How do we ensure the information gets out? Bear asked. Every major news organization has been infiltrated by intelligence agencies. They could suppress the story or discredit it as foreign propaganda. Morrison smiled grimly. That's where modern technology becomes useful. Social media, international news outlets, WikiLeaks-style document dumps. Make the information so widespread that it becomes impossible to suppress. Marcus made his final decision. Both approaches. We steal everything we can, document the evidence, and then destroy what remains. Full exposure and permanent elimination of the program. Hammer nodded approvingly. Now you're thinking like a Marine. Multiple objectives, overwhelming force, leave nothing to chance. As the team began detailed planning for the twin operations, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Afghanistan. Complete clarity of purpose. They were about to risk everything on a mission that most people would consider impossible. But impossibility had never stopped Marines before. One more thing, Marcus said as the meeting was breaking up. When this is over, we're all going to be wanted fugitives. Anyone who wants to walk away now, no judgment. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Spider broke it with characteristic humor. Tank, some of us have been fugitives from normal life for years anyway. At least now, we're fighting for something that matters. The laughter that followed was grim, but genuine. They were about to go to war against their own government, but they were doing it together as Marines, following the principles they had sworn to uphold. Marcus looked around the room one final time, memorizing the faces of people who were about to sacrifice everything for an ideal that most Americans took for granted. The belief that some weapons were too terrible to exist and some secrets too dangerous to keep. In 12 hours, they would either save their country from its own government or die trying. For Marines who had spent their lives serving others, it seemed like an appropriate way to end the story. The mission was simple, even if execution would be complex. Prevent genocide, expose corruption, and remind the world that some principles were worth any price. Marcus Rodriguez had started this fight as a broken veteran trying to survive. He would finish it as what he had always been, a Marine who never left his brothers behind and never forgot his oath to protect the innocent. The final battle was about to begin, and Marcus had never been more certain that he was on the right side. Semper Fi, he said quietly, and 12 voices echoed the words back to him with the conviction of people who understood exactly what they meant. Always faithful to each other, to their principles, and to the belief that some fights were worth any sacrifice. The war was ending exactly where it should, with Marines doing what Marines do best, standing between innocent people and those who would harm them, regardless of the cost. Marcus checked his watch, verified his equipment one final time, and prepared to become the weapon his country had trained him to be. Not against foreign enemies this time, but against the corruption that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. The mission was clear. The team was ready. The only question remaining was whether they could move fast enough to prevent the genocide that was already beginning in laboratories hidden from public view. Time would tell, but Marcus Rodriguez had learned long ago that when time was short and stakes were high, Marines found a way to win. They always had, and with luck and skill and the kind of courage that couldn't be taught, they always would. The final stand was about to begin.